15 minutes.
Good afternoon. It's my pleasure to be the moderator on that panel today about hydrogen energy global initiatives. I'm going to introduce our panelists. So on the far right at the table, Eric MEYER. Eric is a managing director at RBC France. Then in the middle, Charlie Desmoulins. Charlie is a chief investment officer at HDF Energy. And then to my right, Gabriel de LAVAL. Gabriel is head of hydrogen sector at Crédit Agricole CIB. I'm not going to be bothering you with too much figures, but just to set the scene, a few information on hydrogen and the hydrogen market. According to the EU Commission, in 2022, hydrogen accounted for less than 2% of Europe's energy consumption and was primarily used to produce chemical products. And on top of that, the type of hydrogen that was used was gray hydrogen, meaning that it accounted for a significant amount of CO2 emissions. So the priority for the EU in 2030 is basically to develop renewable energy, and it aims at producing 10 million tons and import another 10 million tons of hydrogen, of green hydrogen. As you probably have heard all day long, green energy can be used to replace fossil-based hydrogen for transport. It can also be used in industrial process, again, to replace gray hydrogen. And moreover, it can be used to store renewable energy. So this is a very important matter we're going to be discussing. I'm going to ask you, Gabriel, to tell us a bit about your views on the hydrogen market, on the trends, on the actors, please.
So unlike Geoffrey, I may be bothering with few numbers. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Gabriel de LAVAL. I'm very lucky to be running a global team within Crédit Agricole CIB. So what I'm about to describe now is really the aggregate of what we have seen, what we've discussed, what we are currently discussing with our clients globally across all sectors and across all banking products. First, when we say hydrogen and investment in hydrogen, let's set the scene. It's still a relatively small sector. We need 700 billions. This is mid numbers across various studies of investments up to 2030. 700 billions just to compare with 12,000 billions more that we need in renewables. So hydrogen is still, even though it's very noisy, it's still a very small portion of what needs to be delivered in a net zero trajectory. So the 700 billions, if you aggregate the amounts that have been announced, it's roughly 300. 300 billions of projects have been announced. But 700 billions need to be split between production for half and then infrastructure and downstream or end users for the other half. If you look at the split of the announced project, it is massively about production. So I just leave it there for the infra week. There is absolutely nothing or very little happening in the infrastructure side when it comes to hydrogen. There are reasons for that we won't discuss here, but a lot is being announced on the production, almost nothing in the infrastructure. If we look at where the investments are going or where the discussions are going from a sectorial point of view, most of the money that has been spent already has been spent in equipment manufacturers, so gigafactories for electrolyzers, for fuel cell, or for storage tanks. This is what has happened in terms of real money, real flows of money until now. Now, if we look at the real asset world, there are two sets of sectors that are attracting interest. The first one, and by far the largest, is hydrogen used for the chemical industry. So hydrogen used for chemical reactions for refiners, for green ammonia, for methanol, or for steel. This is completely consistent when you look at the overall flow and the activity that we're having within the bank. It is massively geared towards helping these clients, our clients, within that space. The second sector that is also attracting more and more interest is mobility. So we know that in Europe there are many discussion debates around mobility. Just leaving you with one number, there are currently 130-something hydrogen vehicles available for sale. 97 are Chinese. So while we're having debate on hydrogen mobility, some other countries feel a bit different. So for us, it's something, the activity is gradually increasing in the mobility sector, but it's still far behind what we see in the industrial space. In terms of geographies, there is a big paradox between what we're seeing and what the aggregate numbers are telling us. We are having a lot and numerous discussion with EMEA players or EMEA projects, a little bit starting to peak in the Americas, both Latin America and North America. But really the vast majority is about Europe. And when you see what will be delivered in 2023, you have 1 gigawatt of electrolyzers that are only between the US and China taking the lion's share. So while we're spending a lot of time, and maybe this is something that we'll be discussing later, we're spending a lot of time on projects, on European projects, they are not delivering yet. And the last thing is when we look at where the money is coming from, well, the first pocket of money, even though people are always complaining, is public money. It's billions and billions and billions and tens of billions that are made available for hydrogen ecosystems. In Europe, we're between 60 and 100 billions of money that is made available. And in the US, a few months back, we were only at 10 billions available through the DOE programs. Now it's almost an unlimited, it's not true, but pool of money through the tax credit of the IRA. So public money is clearly the first investor of hydrogen ecosystems. Then we have the equity. The equity is mostly been spent through corporates, so corporates on their own balance sheet developing their own projects for themselves or in joint ventures. And then we see some newcomers, so developers, startups that needs external financing, and that's where we see a little bit of equity raising taking place, either through the markets, and we've had a 2021 season that was very interesting for that, or through private money, and that's where most of the infra funds are actually deploying, is to fund developing platforms. And we've seen that in Europe, we've seen that in North America. The last pool of money that is gradually being made available is the bank market. We started, I will speak only for Crédit Agricole, but we started, as I mentioned, equipment manufacturers. We provided financing for these people. And now we're gradually seeing more and more market projects, that are going through FID. There are not that many. For us, we've seen two. We've seen NEOM, so in Saudi Arabia, a big green ammonia plant, and we've seen H2 Green Steel in Sweden, a big steel plant, which these are really the two pure project financing that we've seen and where we've committed financing. So that was just a quick overview of what we're seeing in the market, which corroborate sometimes and sometimes not what the aggregate numbers are showing.
Thank you, Gabriel, for setting the scene. You've mentioned, and thanks for the transition, the public money and IRA. So, Eric, it would be interesting to have your views as to whether the Inflation Reduction Act, which basically is flowing a lot of money in the US market, how it would impact the rest of the market, and maybe a word on the various policies in the EU, for example.
Thank you, Geoffrey. Yes, yeah, indeed. I mean, the announcement of the Inflation Reduction Act in the summer of 2022 came as a shock and sent shivers among European players and policymakers. Just imagine a massive, $365 billion plan predicated on apparently simple and direct tax credit mechanism without caps, making it at first glance irresistible, and luring every producer to set shop in the US at the detriment of Europe in particular. Europe's hasty response, the Green Deal industrial plan, looks somewhat patchy and a bit less sexy. But is it really that simple? And is Europe's hydrogen industry doomed by offshoring? Hard to say, but I don't think so. Well, first of all, I mean, the very fact that the US, for the first time ever, shows interest in tackling climate issues is great news for the planet and great news for all of us, wherever we are. So the creation of a conducive ecosystem will not only benefit local industry in the US, but boost investments throughout, allow new technologies and innovations to emerge, and foster a financial market, all on a scale only the US can develop, but whose effect will be felt and benefit by all of us across the world. It is true as well that the IRA makes things apparently simple. If you look at it, it's a single act. Okay, admittedly, there are two delegated acts, but just one single act. One tax credit mechanism, money in the bag, with certainty on day one, and no caps. By contrast, if you look at a GDIP, it is more or less a compilation of a number of measures, pre-existent or new, but all based on subsidies, mostly funded by individual member states, with much less clarity on delivery and timing. There's as well, a great commitment to reduce red tape, which is welcome, but always taken with a grain of salt coming from Brussels. But, and this is a very big but, implementation of the IRA is proving exceedingly complex in its application. The Treasury Department provided its long-awaited clarifying guidance on Section 45V and which projects have been selected for the H2 hubs funding. But the devil is in the detail. In essence, defining eligibility to credit along the three guiding principles of additionality, deliverability, and time matching has yet to be fully specified and remains subject to a wide spectrum in each one of them, from the manageable to the most stringent. In the latter case, the anticipated bonanza may prove elusive or challenging to get, depending on where the cursor is set and how easily measurable will the criteria be. This is just to say that the initial reaction of some European industry elites, if their reaction was to rush and plan to build in the US, I believe the overall move will be much more considerate and is unlikely to translate into a full exodus. Ultimately, things will ease out on both sides of the Atlantic, the haze will clarify, and projects will emerge on their own merits. And maybe the last point, and Gabriel was right to say this is, particularly when it comes to hydrogen, a nascent industry with little this stage, but the needs overall are so large. Europe's energy independence by 2040 requires 2 trillion euros. That's a number. And the hydrogen roadmap Europe sees demand up to 665 terawatt hours in, forgot the time, I think it's 2030 or 2035. So large so that early arbitrageurs will not tilt the balance dramatically. So I think a more muted or less alarming picture than what we saw in the beginning.
Thank you, Eric. After setting the big picture of the industry, we thought it could be a good idea to have a look into details, and we are turning to Charlie for that to talk to us about the challenges faced by the hydrogen project and especially the bankability issues.
Thanks, Geoffrey, and very, very happy to be here. First, I hope that in a few years from now on, we won't talk about the bankability challenges of hydrogen, because this is a key topic right now. Having said that, I would like to mention three key items for me. The first one will be around the certification of low-carbon hydrogen. There's been a lot of work in a lot of different countries about what is low-carbon hydrogen. Now we can say that some numbers has been put, even if it's not 100% clear, but at least it will help. And anyway, at the end of the day, for a project that's going to last 20, 30, 60 years, we will have to demonstrate that the hydrogen is low carbon, so coming from low carbon electricity, etc., etc. And I think it's one of the challenges today because there is still a framework which is not clear, and this will have to demonstrate it for a lot of years. That was the first point. The second one is around technology risk, as it's early technology, but for me it's not technology risk, it's more education. We need to educate first the hydrogen equipment suppliers about what we want to do with our project structuration. And this is something we have done as HDF starting 6 years ago, visiting the electrolyzer company, explaining what we wanted to achieve as non-recourse project finance, explaining what's going to be the requirement, explaining what they need to achieve on their side, proving that the technology is working, proving what kind of maintenance needs to be done, what kind of risk, what could happen, and so on. So to be as transparent as they can, on top of being behind their technology as they can as well, because guarantee and contract is key as well in this world. And on the other side of the education, I would say we need to educate the lenders, we need to educate the investor about the level of risk that they are going to take when they are jumping into this hydrogen journey, which is a little bit different from other activities. And it takes time, but it needs to be done, and the mapping is not 100% done yet, but this is something which is key. The technology has been working for decades. Now there is a new players in the technology that are investing a lot in gigafactories and so on, but the technology has been existing for decades. So technological risk is there, but is less than what we can think. It's more the scale up and the faculty of developing those technology worldwide, which is a risk. And the third item I wanted to mention is, let's say, the sustainability of those long-term investments. And what I mean by that, I mean there are projects that now are much more competitive than others, or at least sectors that can pay a less premium than others in the hydrogen. So we need to focus on projects that can make sense in the short term and that will make sense in the long term as well. There are a lot of subsidy, a lot of concessional loan, but this tariff of hydrogen need to last for 20, 30 years. Another aspect of sustainability as well is to not forget when you are building an infrastructure that you have people around you. And I mean that because we are talking a lot about export. So building in Namibia, in Chile, in Australia, where there are sun, wind, a lot of hydrogen infrastructure, and importing in Europe. But in those countries, you have local people that can use the hydrogen for fertilizer, for the agriculture, for the electricity. And it's really key when developing those kind of infrastructure that everything is taken in account and that there is some local impact. Otherwise, it could mean that this project will not last. And maybe a last word, you were mentioning the fact that there is a few projects that has reached FID today, which is true. But we should not forget neither that everyone is now talking about hydrogen, but 3 years ago, no one was talking about hydrogen. Meaning, and you all know it, in order to develop those kind of infrastructure, it takes time. So this is not anormal, let's say, that there is a limited number of FID projects. It's going to take time. We need to be patient, but we need to push in the same way. But it's something that everyone will need to realize as well. We are talking about a gas that can explode. We are talking about a new industry. We are talking about a lot of new things. Everything is there to make it happen, but it takes time.
Gabriel, would you like to add a few words with, speaking as a financial advisor or lender?
Yeah, I think Charlie said it right, but just add one common theme that we're seeing. We're advising projects, I would say, across the globe. We're advising more than 30 billion worth of projects that could take FID within the next 3 years. There is one challenge that they are all facing, is who is the buyer, which links to 2 points, what the price is able to pay, This is about green premium and the ability for him to swallow the green premium. So it could be a public entity, then it's about long-term visibility. But if it's a B2B business, which most cases it is, then you need to find the right buyer. And it also comes with the certification point that you mentioned, because actually some buyers have much more stringent constraints when it comes to RFNBO in Europe, for instance. Won't enter into these details today, but that could put much more constraints on this certification issue. So the common theme that we're seeing is who is the buyer. This is, I think, true for most developers, and it is true for us as a lender now, because actually what we're going to be banking is not the asset. When I discuss about production of whatever hydrogen or hydrogen derivatives, we're not banking the assets. We're banking the offtake contracts. So again, the offtake contract for us, whereas in some asset classes, the value is around the asset, for us, it's really about the offtake contract. So everything starts with that. So this is the critical point, and that's where I think that public entities should help developers to find the right buyers and help the buyers to swallow the green premium.
Thank you for sharing this view with us. Charlie was mentioning that it takes time to develop an hydrogen project, but it also takes money. And on that front, we were wondering whether or not the financial markets were ready to help and invest in that market. Charlie, maybe first on that, if you want.
Thanks. They have to be ready because we are coming. We are developing projects. The hydrogen infrastructure is at a crossroads between traditional infra, oil and gas project, and renewable energy project. So it's something that will need to be considered as well, is the fact that we're going to have different players from different universe, a different way of working, different way of contract. We'll have to find compromise between all those parties, meaning that people that are used to loan money in the oil and gas maybe will not be comfortable with the contract that would look like at the end of the day in the hydrogen, or vice versa. So they're going to need compromise, and they're going to need efforts from the lenders as well to accept the way the projects are going to be structured. And I think it's part of the education I was mentioning. It's really interesting to discuss with people which have a lot of different experience, but at the end of the day, we need to agree. It's not easy neither, but that's going to be one of the target. And the second thing I would like to mention on whether they are ready or not is the fact that it's not going to be 100% perfect, meaning that hydrogen is going to be developed in a lot of locations, but we are talking about a lot of export from developing countries. So there could be country risk. We're going to have EPC that are taking the risk of hydrogen, but not fully today. You're going to have sponsor of investor that wants to participate in the hydrogen, but this is not mature yet. And at the end of the day, you're going to have an off-taker that will decide whether he agrees to pay or not, and at which term, etc. And I think usually what you are trying to do is to make sure that you have a bankable off-taker, a bankable EPC, a bankable SPV, and a bankable country. Maybe at some point in the hydrogen, we'll have to do some compromise as well. I'm not saying a big compromise, but we'll have to do a little bit of compromise. Otherwise, it could be complicated to develop this industry as speed as we want and as fast as we need.
Gabriel, would you like to add something?
Maybe to complete. Broader than hydrogen, just energy transition at large will bring, for me, this is my personal view, two challenges for us as a member of the financing industry. The first one is, yes, higher risk profile, the way you call it. It's exactly what you describe. And we will need to agree that to take much more risk on assets that we don't really know as much as we know solar or renewable. So the first element is higher complexity. It's true for hydrogen, it will be true for carbon capture, for a lot of biomolecules that we will need for the energy transition. This is one aspect. Second aspect is just about the volumes. And we discussed about hydrogen, the fact that the volumes, if we want to deploy 700 billions by 2030, we need to deploy more or less between 80 and 100 billions per year starting this year. We're not there yet. So there is this question of volume for hydrogen, but again, for the entire energy transition. And if you believe that we will be able just to switch the investments from oil and gas to energy transition, I'm not sure that will be sufficient. I don't know if you're familiar with the numbers from Bloomberg New Energy Finance. More or less, we're spending between 1.3 and 2 trillions per year in energy. Again, if we want to stay within net zero tracks by 2030, we will need to spend 4.5 trillions. So it's 2 to 3 times more than what we're spending, and that's only for energy transition. So there is this question of volumes, and whether the financial markets are ready to absorb the future volumes is a big question that we need to ask ourselves. And again, I don't know whether it's a real challenge or not, but at least it's a question. Are we ready to swallow 4.5 trillions of new investment per year until 2030?
Eric, do you have the answer to that question?
Thank you. No, I very much echo what my two co-panelists have just said. I just add one thing. I think what is truly important is to have clear rules of the game. So this is a nascent industry. This is a moment where you have a lot of players, a lot of fairies that have basically gathered around the cradle and are trying to help. The states, obviously, the manufacturers, and a lot of, well, not a lot, but some equity that is trying to get there. As this industry is growing, as this will go, the rules of engagement will become clearer. It is absolutely great that the state have provided and provides subsidies to help this industry grow. There is a point in time where rules of engagement will be more important than subsidies. And in some ways, in a way, you were asking me about the comparison between IRA and Europe. It is true that in the US, the way the IRA is conceived, if it goes all the way down, it makes it a very simple and very clear agreement. There's already scheduled in the IRA plan the transferability of tax credit, which is in effect a way to create a market. And I think one of the challenges that Europe will have is that for the moment you have a number of subsidies. Each subsidy will be discussed at state level and that will be complex. So the sooner the market of kind will evolve, the sooner it will be more where can you get the money, the more the banks and the financial players will be willing and comfortable in basically getting into that. So that was my only addition to the view. But, it's right, it's an infant industry, it's starting. There's an awful lot that has been achieved. You have, people who come and take risk and make things happen. So, it's got to take time and we'll be there.
Thank you.
To end up on a positive note, it's a massive opportunity.
Absolutely. As we're not too bad at timing-wise, I think we have time for last topic, and it would be a pity not to ask that question to you, considering that we're in Ministère de l'Économie et des Finances. So what about France? What are your views on the French market before we take some question from the floor? Gabriel, maybe?
So France within Europe is a very interesting animal. First, we have a lot of potential technology providers. And this is extremely interesting. We have some deep depth research with the CEA that have initiated a lot of our hydrogen startups. So we have this manufacturing ecosystem that is gradually taking shape, both with very large corporates and with startups. That is great. That is about equipment. Then when you look about the molecule itself, so production and consumption, we are split a little bit between two neighbors that we'll take as illustration. The first one is Germany. Germany is a massive consumer of grey hydrogen. We're not, just because we don't have the industry as large as Germany. So we're not a big consumer of grey hydrogen. On the other hand, can we be a large producer of hydrogen? Hydrogen, and especially when it's produced with electrolysis, it's about electricity. So do we have the right electricity to massively produce hydrogen? Well, if we compare ourselves to Spain or even the other side of the Mediterranean Sea, they have better electricity. It's cheaper, and they can produce at much more competitive terms. So France is a little bit in between. We have a market which is not as large as Germany, and we have some very good low-carbon electricity, but it's not as cheap as Spain. And we need to find our place, and it's not easy, you know, and I'm not sure that the scene is set yet, the scene is set yet. But that's an interesting debate, and there are many questions that are left open on whether we will be a massive producer or not, whether we will focus on transportation and infrastructure. These are open questions, but again, our role within the European scene is a little bit, I would say, well, not easy to find.
Thank you, Gabriel. Sorry, Charlie.
I agree with the paradox that was mentioned by Gabriel. But what's one thing that France did so far, and which is supporting the industry, is implementing factory in France. So today you have, for example, McPhee, John Cockerill, which are building electrolyzer factory in France that will support the development of this technology in Europe and even worldwide. On our side, we are building right now a factory in Bordeaux for high-power fuel cell that will enable as well to tackle different kind of industries, maritime, railway, electricity. So maybe it's not clear where the France wants to go, but at least there are some industries right now which are investing in France and that could make France as an exporter of equipment potentially, and which is already good. And we are taking a little bit of advance compared to the other countries and to the world potentially. So we just need now to keep this momentum and to keep this advance compared to the others.
Okay, so yeah, no, so Gabriel is absolutely right that France stands somewhere in between. But there is one thing where France is good. It's nuclear energy. So, you know, stating the obvious, I mean, ready access to renewable electricity is a prerequisite for green hydrogen production, and both time matching and transport can fundamentally alter the economic equation of projects. Therefore, if you have access to the, if you can access the grid, it can prove a game changer, but basins of full renewable electricity are few and sparse. As part of the Green Deal industrial plan, the EU is considering granting nuclear energy an exemption under its rule related to clean hydrogen production. In effect, producers may be able to count electricity taken from the grid as fully renewable if it's located in areas where power emissions are less than 18 grams per microjoule, which essentially opens the way for nuclear energy. So, France's energy mix, with its large share of nuclear energy production and the wide distribution of its sites, is a very significant asset in this respect. I think as well the commitment of France and of the state and its government to the development of nuclear energy and its ability to channel and support with subsidies, basically the production and access to this electricity, is an advantage that can mitigate the reservation that Gabriel expressed.
Thanks a lot. I think we are left with something like 1 minute, so maybe if there is 1 or 2 questions from the floor, we are happy to take some questions. No? Nobody? So I believe you've been very clear on all those matters. Thanks a lot, and thanks for your help on that. Thank you.
Thank you so much for moderating this discussion. Thank you. And we're going to continue now, and we're going to have the closing session of the inaugural day of Paris Infra Week 2023. I'm going to invite on stage the moderator, Francois April, partner Paris, Linklaters, and the speakers for it. The closing session of the inaugural day. Please, the stage is yours.